So I was going to continue today with the Gary Snyder piece that I was reading about Buddhist anarchism, but I changed my mind because, as I often do, I was. By the way, can people see me when my picture is off the screen? Like now, I can't see myself, but can you see me? Because I have to go down and check comments and stuff, and I don't know if I suddenly disappear from your screen or not. Somebody could tell me. Anyway, what I like to do is I like to browse the Suzuki Roshi archives. That to me is the source, other than my own Zazen, that I find the most reliable inspiration. And so what I think I'm going to do for a few times, and I'll ask for your comments how it works for you. I'm going to go over a Dharma talk and go through it paragraph by paragraph to discuss it and see how it sits. And I like this one. This is called Breathing, and it was delivered as an afternoon lecture at a sesshin in November of 1965. And I think it'll become clear. So I'm going to read a paragraph, and I'm also going to keep an eye peeled for messages down here, or like questions. When we practice, our mind always follows our breathing. When we practice, our mind always follows our breathing. When we inhale, the air we take comes into our inner world, and when we exhale, the air goes from inside out. The inner world is limitless, and so is the outer world. So our throat is like a swinging door. The air comes in, and the air goes out. The air comes in, the air comes out. It's just like a swinging door. What you call I is a swinging door, which moves when we inhale and exhale. It just moves. That's all it's doing. Exhale, inhale. There's no I there. You're being breathed by the universe. So when we practice Zazen, there's nothing. There's no I, there's no mind, there's no body. There's just a swinging door. Now, in order for that condition to hold true, it means we have to concentrate more and more fervently on following our breath, not organizing our breath. But our breathing is the nature of the universe. Swinging door, in, out. The entire universe is breathing, each form at its own speed. And so what we're doing is we're getting in sync with that. And when we sit like a Buddha, we are a Buddha. And when we pay attention to our breath, we are mimicking prajna paramita. We're actually doing it. And we're syncing up with the basic force of the universe. We say inner world and we say outer world, but actually it's the same thing. There's just one whole world. This is our practice. Our practice in sitting Zazen is being aware in the moment of what's actually going on with our breathing, the movement of our breathing. We shouldn't be absent-minded. We'll have fantasies generated. You know, I'm always chasing that Eskimo woman somewhere through the snow. But our job is to stay aware of our breathing. And the more thoroughly we refine ourselves and the more thoroughly we attend to our breathing, the softer our breathing gets and the subtler our breathing gets. And as things open up in our breathing, things open up in our life. As our awareness of the subtleties of our breathing open up, so does the subtlety of our life. So being aware of the movement of our breathing is not the same thing as being aware of ourself. that breathing is our Buddha nature. Our self is our personality. There's a whole lot of ideas. The movement of our breathing, of our breath, is universal. That's Buddha nature. And that is our actual, true, real self. That's to be distinguished from our personality. Little Petey Coyote. So the practice of Zazen is to be aware of Buddha nature. So normally our understanding of life is actually pretty one-sided because it's always dualistic. We're always thinking in terms of I and you. I and you. That's a dualism. And what we forget is that when I and you, good and bad, all these contradictions, that what we're actually doing, you means to be aware of the universe in the form of you. That's what it actually means. I means to be aware of the form of the universe as I, as this mind-body combo job. Let me read that again because it's really important. Normally our understanding and interpretation of life is one-sided because our understanding of life is always dualistic. So if there are two things, we're looking at one or the other. We rarely marry them. And the basic contradiction is self and other, I and other. But it's actually a learned concept. It's a learned thing. I is just the universe from this point of view. And you is just the universe from the point of view, of the other. Both are heads and tails of the same coin. This is the true experience of Zen, true experience of life, and it's much deeper than understanding. It's not an intellectual practice. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to go to Harvard. You have to be humble and pay attention and soften your awareness and just make it receptive like water, so it's just tracking your breath. And when you do that, you'll see your breath's doing all sorts of wiggy things. There are little curly cues and back eddies and little hiccups, and sometimes it's a very long breath and sometimes it isn't. But gradually, by just leaving it alone and just paying attention, it softens up. It reminds me of something I discovered once a long time ago, where I realized there were kind of two basic questions that people ask. One is what, and one is why. And our earliest ancestors basically asked what. They surrendered to the universe, they copied the universe, they imitated the universe, they looked at it, and they tried to refine their understanding of what happened. The sun rose here this morning, it rose here the next day, it rose here the next day. At a certain point, it got to the end of the line, and it started back. And they began seeing that that was a dependable pattern. And they began seeing that those ends of the lines were the midwinter and summer solstice, the longest and the shortest days. And then they identified the equinoxes. And from that came a kind of celestial calendar, a kind of understanding of the universe based on what. And the difference between what and why is that why is always has some kind of implicit quest for power in it. Why? How can I control this? How does it work? What's the source? How can I get to the bottom of it? So when we sit Zazen and we're looking at our breathing, we're in a what mode? What's my breathing doing? Swinging door, back and forth, back and forth. That's all that's happening, one thing after another. So when we practice Zazen, it follows from that unity that neither is there any time and space, because time and space is another duality. It's kind of a fiction, like that we can separate time from space. For instance, it's 10:21 on my little clock right here, 10:21. Well, 10:21 is Yellow Plum Farm, Sebastopol, California, in front of this computer. That's what it is for me. Yours will be different. It's not 10:21 everywhere. It's only 10:21 everywhere if we can separate time and space. And then we've hacked up the universe with a hatchet. We don't want to do that. So we have an idea that, let's say, I sit Zazen every morning at 5:30, and I sit in my little wild dog Zendo, and there's 5:30 is the time, wild dog Zendo is the space, and I think of them as separate. But actually, all I'm doing is I'm just sitting, and I'm being aware of this universal activity of my breathing. And it's not my breathing, because I'm not doing it. I'm being breathed. And so when I'm paying attention to that breathing, when I'm really tuned into what? I've transcended self. I've transcended time and space. I'm completely unified. And we bathe in that experience day after day, time after time, to get confidence in it and to learn how to carry it farther and farther into our lives. So, so when we're sitting, the swinging door is just moving. This is time, but it's also space. It's indivisible. Swinging door is just coming in and out, one thing after another. We say, I have to do something this afternoon. Believe me, I say I have to do something this afternoon. I say I have to do something at 11:05 when this talk is over. But when we actually think about it, there is no this afternoon, and there is no 11:05. If I eat my lunch at 1 o'clock, eating my lunch is 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock is not different from my lunch. To think it is a mental pet. To think it is to assume that time exists as its own individuated thing in the universe, and we're just tracking it. We're not a part of it. And that my lunch is not my time. These are all subtle habits that we've been taught of regarding the universe. And Zazen is like a perfect counter to them. Because when we sit Zazen, they all dissolve. They all dissolve into a unity. There is no time and space. I'm just sitting. The door is just flapping in and out, one thing after another. That's what we're actually doing. So, for somebody who actually appreciates their life, it's just one thing. It's the entire whole ball of wax. As soon as we start breaking it up, as soon as we become critical of it, as soon as we say, oh, I shouldn't have come here for lunch, isn't that such a good idea? Suddenly we've separated ourselves. Time and space are different because I have this idea I could be over there, or I could be doing something else with this time. I couldn't. This time is sitting here waiting for the waiter to show up with my matzo ball soup. That's what it is. Now, if I do something after that, and something after that, and something after that, that's the way life goes. But each of those things that I do, that will be time and space conjoined, and that's the way we unify our lives, and that's the way we enjoy our lives. Because we're not always thinking what we're missing. Oh, I wish I'd bought that dress. Oh, look at that car. Wow, I wish I had that car. Now that boils down into like a really simple concept, and it's going to sound silly. So let's take the idea of bad and good. It's another duality, right? Obviously, when we think about it, they're both contained in the immensity of the universe. But we think of good as something we should do, and we think of bad as something we shouldn't do. And we don't say we shouldn't do it, we say we should not do it. And if you hear that not do as a hyphen, not do, you can see we have only two choices in every moment. We either do or we not do. Both of them are activity, both of them are choices, and we're not free not to choose. Now, when we say bad and good, that's confusing, and that adds a whole overlay to it because it creates political and social systems and value judgments. What's bad for you is maybe not bad for me. You know, giving water to people on the voting line to you is indulging people, and they should have remembered to bring their own, so we're training weakness. For me, it means, oh, I'm absent-minded. I forget my water. Maybe other people do. Maybe I can help them because it's hot out and thirsty. So, but if you take bad out of it and good out of it, you're just down to doing or not doing. Doing or not doing. One thing after another. I'd have a question here. How is that another mode? I don't understand that question, Jay. I'm not sure I'm talking about modes. So what it actually comes down to is we don't have all the choices that we think we have. We're always doing something. We're either doing, or we're doing, not doing. And it doesn't have to be dependent on ideas of bad and good. It can be dependent on the way it makes us feel. It can be dependent on an intuition we have about what someone else needs. Suzuki Roshi is always trying to get us to see that we're part of a whole, and that every time we balkanize it and every time we break it up, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're distracting and confusing ourselves. So when we separate time and space, for instance, we feel like we have a lot of choices that we don't actually have. Jigo. Every moment that happens, every moment that passes, we have to do something. We can do or we can not do, but both are choices. And both are under our control to some degree. So we say bad, we should not do bad, and good, we should do good. But to a Zen student, we don't say bad. To a Zen student, we just say not do. I'm not going to do that. The judgment is extra. You can't have bad without good. You can't have good without bad. They depend on each other. So for us to simplify our lives and make it simple, we just say we're either doing or we're not doing. It's like when we sit Zazen. We're just sitting. We're just paying attention to our breath. When our mind wanders, we're going to not do. We're not going to judge it as bad. It's distracting, so we're going to come back to our breath because that's what we're doing. It's much simpler than we make it most of the time. So if we think of it as good and bad, well, I've explained why it becomes confusing. Because what's bad to you is not bad to someone else. And the language itself, like, people can use the word liberal, and they mean entirely different things. So when you're talking to a liberal group, they understand exactly what you mean by it. And when members of a non-liberal group are talking, they know exactly what they mean by it. And the language is just confusing, as opposed to saying, what are they doing? What are they not doing? So in the realm of, it's important to say that I'm speaking in the context of religious practice. So in the world of religion, there's no confusion, Zen religion. There's no confusion between time and space. There's no confusion between good and bad. Because every day we're practicing diving into our Buddha nature and becoming absorbed by it and relinquishing the distinctions and the contradictions by going to the larger, all-inclusive source with which we are inextricably connected at every moment. Just like we're connected to oxygen or water or sunlight. So the point that Suzuki Roshi brings up time and time again is that there's no confusion in this life and that you can organize your entire life to be that way. So I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. Some of you may not have heard it. I used to go to tea every week with Mitsu Suzuki, who was the widow of Suzuki Roshi. We called her Oksan, which is Japanese for mom. And we would have tea, and she would tease me and tell me stories and make little treats for me and stuff. And one day she brought out this little plate of tea sweets, and they're cute. They're small. It's like looking at a Whitman's sampler, only they're not chocolate, but they're exotic-looking little things. And so she passed the plate to me, and I'm looking at the plate, and I'm thinking, oh God, I don't want to get the biggest. I don't want to get the smallest. Which one really looks good? And she saw what I was doing. She just cut right through. And she said, always closest. Sometimes biggest, sometimes smallest. Always closest. Doesn't sound like much, but it blew what little mind I have. And I thought, how practical, how simple, how much that decision cuts through. She knows you're always doing something. You have to choose. So just choose the one that's closest to you. Stop all the mentation, stop all the confusion. Just take the one that's closest. If somebody's going to think you chose it because it's the biggest, that's their problem. If it is the biggest, that's their problem. You just always have this little rule. And so Suzuki Roshi does this in everything. The important thing is that you want to become purely one with the activity of inhaling and exhaling. And we can try to make our minds as pure and as limpid and as receptive as we possibly can. And we can stay aware of our awareness no matter what we're doing. We can try to bring that Zazen mind into a conversation. It'll help us with getting angry, not getting angry, doing or not doing. And it's that practice which continually reminds us that our life is unified and that all the contradictions and the balkanizing are mental pets. And they don't really serve us. They keep us confused. So there's a lovely thing, where is it? Tozan. Yeah. There was a famous Zen master named Tozan, and he said, the blue mountain is father of the white cloud. Blue mountain is father of white cloud, and white cloud is the son of blue mountain. So all day long they depend on each other without knowing it. They're just depending on each other, but the white cloud is always the white cloud, and the mountain is always the mountain. And so they're simultaneously absolutely singular and free, and absolutely dependent. And so are we. So these childish conversations about freedom are just one half of the equation, because we're already free, but we're also totally dependent on one another and on the universe and on everything which is supporting our life. So if we don't have that big field in mind that unifies both those things, we're going to choose one or the other. We're going to choose time or we're going to choose space. We're going to choose good or we're going to choose bad. We're going to choose freedom or we're going to choose dependent. But it's just like only looking at one side of the coin. And we suffer for that ignorance. So Suzuki Roshi points out to us that this is how we live and how we practice Zazen. When we become ourselves purely, when we just become a swinging door, there's no room in there for I. It's not I am sitting. The I is extra. I'm breathing in. I'm breathing out. Breathing in. Breathing out. When we do that, that's our purest state. That's when we are the most aligned to the natural forces of the universe, the most in harmony with everything, the most in harmony with Buddha's life. And the blue mountain is not bothered by the white cloud. So they're each what they are, and they're simultaneously dependent and independent. And that's a great riddle to work on in your Zazen. If there were no air, we couldn't take a breath. If there was no oxygen, we couldn't be following our breath. So obviously we're dependent on the air. We're dependent on water. We're dependent on each other. So the way that we remember this is by paying attention to our breathing and trying to put everything aside and just rest our awareness on our breathing. If we try to make our breathing smooth, it's not going to work. If we try to slow it down, it's not going to work. But you can just follow it, and it will slow down on its own. That's what I call getting out of your own way. Let's see. I remain on screen. Nice. Hello from somewhere over the Pacific. Tony Head's going to Hawaii. Just looking at things because I'm sort of almost at the end of this. So I want to read this little last paragraph of Suzuki Roshi. Always, moment after moment, we are at the center of myriad worlds. So we are both quite dependent and independent. If you understand this, or if you have this kind of experience, you have absolute independence. This is why the Zen people say, put no head above your own. Because you are the center from the point of view of self and other. You're the center of the world. But that world is constrained and bound and interdependent with every other thing in the world. But if you can follow this, you won't be bothered by anyone. So when you practice Zazen, your mind should be concentrated in your breathing. And this kind of activity is the fundamental activity of the universal being. If so, how we should use our minds is quite clear. Without this experience or this practice, it's impossible to attain this absolute freedom. So what is it that tells us how to use our minds? That's the question. You could call it intuition. You could call it the universe itself speaking over the spinal telephone. But it's not our intelligence. And it's not our ideas. It's a signal that we can receive when we get internally calm enough and quiet enough to let the static dissipate. So I'm going to look at some of these comments here and see. I think we have to take Hitler's rise and acts in the context of the politics of the earlier decades of the 20th century. The Third Reich shows us that ordinary humans, and we're the same kind of humans, are capable of doing the most horrifying things and finding the most bizarre justifications and rationalizations. So I'm not exactly sure what I said that prompted Hitler to come to mind, or it's certainly what you said is true. But you could actually say the opposite of everything. You could say that the existence of the Dalai Lama shows us that ordinary humans, and we too are the same kind of humans, are capable of doing the most wondrous things and finding the most bizarre justifications and rationalizations for them. I mean, do you see how you're looking at one half of an equation here? Oh, Sandra's been sitting, but her screen froze. Happy Wednesday. That's about it for me today. It always brings up the... Oh, I see. Sorry. What are modes, your word? Did I say something about modes today? Judy says, you said why and what are modes, your word. But investigating what leads me to... why and what are modes? So. I understand. Sorry. So I was telling you my own little observation about thinking about the way we investigate things. And there are kind of two underlying questions that we can ask, or that people do ask. One is what, and one is why. So if we start from very, very early mankind, we can see people were awake in a world that was luminous and wondrous and filled with danger and filled with threats. And as time passed and consciousness and memory accrued, we can also see that they began to uncover patterns. So the how of exploring what is close observation. Watching an animal as opposed to dissecting it. Watching what it does. Suzuki Roshi talked about putting your cow in a big field. That's how you'll always know where it is. If you keep it chained up and close, you're always fussing with it. It's getting tangled in the chain. Why, I think, is more the province of the scientific method. And it's obviously done a lot of good for humankind. I mean, be silly to say it didn't. But it's also kind of based on isolating and isolating things from their context. So, you want to remove the variables. You want to get a question down to one variable so you can see, does this variable control the outcome? Does that variable control the outcome? It's obviously a useful thing to do. I'm just not so drawn to it. I remember as a kid being really upset reading an article in the newspaper. I was about 11 years old, about a scientist who was putting rats in a bucket of water and timing them until they drowned. And I was horrified by that somebody could stand there and watch a living creature exhaust itself and then drown. I kept thinking you could take it out of the water. So I wrote the guy a letter, a really angry letter. I never got a response. And then once when I was a little older, my beloved biology teacher put a leopard frog in the palm of my hand. And it was just astounding. It was like pulsing and breathing and glistening and green and brown and yellow spots on it. I was just sort of lost in it. And all of a sudden, he took a little red dowel with a needle on it and he drove it through the back of its brain and he killed it. And he said, "That's called pithing." And he shared it with me like it was the most exciting thing he'd ever discover. And now we could cut the frog open. Well, that was interesting, but wasn't nearly as interesting as the living frog. So if you want to, I always think of, if you want to discover why, you kill the frog and you cut it open and you look at its parts. But I much prefer the questioning of how, of what. What does the universe present us with? And how can we get more and more and more and more intimate with it? Judy was telling me once about taking care of tatami mats and how in different weather they require different care. I found that fascinating, that people have studied tatami mats long enough to know that and have worked out systems of care. So that to me is another example of what. And what has an inherent humility in it. The humility is that what exists is worth study, is worth your time, is worth the sacrifice of your time, without trying to control it, just trying to understand what it is, that the universe is complex beyond our imagining. And since the Industrial Revolution, and since, Newton, we've been kind of obsessed with why, and why always has elements of control in it. That's how we get fossil fuel fertilizers. We figure out why a plant grows and we give it food, but we lose the context that we're killing the bees and that we're killing the microbes in the soil with this stuff. So for a period of time, we get big crops, and we want that. But we're also degrading the soil, and eventually we have to abandon it, as is happening all over California, where the soil has become impacted with fossil fuel fertilizers and is no longer productive. Anyway, that's the why and the what. That's it for me. I'm about done, but I'd like to hear from people. If you like this idea of going through these Dharma talks, it probably doesn't matter to me if you like it or not, because I like it. But if you don't like it, then I'll try to figure out a way to make it more interesting. In the meantime, let's do the metta prayer. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace.